My fiancé said, "I need someone with real connections and influence, not just potential." I agreed calmly and called off the wedding that same night. Nearly a year later, she arrived at a charity gala on her boss's arm and realized I was standing on stage introducing the keynote speaker to the entire room. "I need someone with real connections and influence, not just potential." She said it the way you'd read a line off a resume rejection letter. Not cruel, not even loud, just matter of fact, like she'd been rehearsing it. I stood there in our kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, and said absolutely nothing. And the worst part? Deep down, I think I already knew this moment was coming. I just didn't expect it to arrive on a Tuesday night while she was still wearing my hoodie. What I couldn't have known then, what I had absolutely no way of predicting, was that 11 months later, she would walk into the same room as me, on the arm of her boss, and watch me shake hands with a senator on a stage lit by $50,000 worth of chandeliers. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what was on the line that night. We had a venue booked, a date confirmed, caterers who'd already been paid a deposit. Her mother had a dress. My grandmother had booked a flight from Connecticut. The invitations, cream cardstock with gold foil lettering, were sitting in a box in the hallway closet, addressed and ready to mail. For years, that's what we'd built. For years of shared grocery lists and airport pickups and learning each other's bad moods. For years of Sunday mornings and inside jokes and building something that felt, to me at least, like the beginning of a real life together. And in one sentence, standing barefoot on the kitchen tile, Serenella had quietly burned the whole thing to the ground. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Not just about us, about me. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 29. She was 27. We'd met at a rooftop fundraiser in Midtown, mutual friends, bad wine, a stunning view of the city. She was sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who walked into rooms and immediately understood the power map. I admired that about her. We moved fast. Too fast, maybe, but it felt right at the time. The signs were there earlier. I just had a talent for explaining them away. 6 months before that kitchen conversation, I'd been passed over for a promotion at the consulting firm where I worked. It stung, but I wasn't worried. I had a plan. I was already building something on the side, a venture that Wesley, my college roommate, and I had been quietly developing for nearly 2 years. It wasn't ready for public attention yet, but it was moving. Serenella knew about it in broad strokes. She just didn't believe in it. "You need to stop treating a hobby like a career pivot," she said once, sometime around February. I told her it was more than a hobby. She smiled the way people smile when they're too polite to argue but too convinced to agree. I should have paid more attention to that smile. The second sign came at a dinner party at her colleague Lucian's apartment in the West Village. Nice place. The kind of apartment that announces itself. Serenella spent the entire evening talking to Lucian's boss, Emmeline, a venture capitalist with a reputation for backing exactly the kind of companies I was building. But she never once introduced me into the conversation. I circled. I waited. She laughed at something Emmeline said and touched her arm like they were old friends. On the cab ride home, I mentioned it. "You were busy," she said, not looking up from her phone. I wasn't busy. I was standing 5 feet away. You know how those conversations go? Timing is everything. I let it go. I shouldn't have. The third sign, the one I was best at ignoring, was that every time someone at a party or dinner asked what I did, Serenella would answer before I could. And her answer was always technically accurate, but architecturally dishonest. She'd say consulting, and leave it there, like the rest of it didn't exist. Like the thing I was actually building didn't exist. I mentioned it once. She said, "People in those circles don't invest in ideas. They invest in track records." I asked her whose circle she was talking about. She didn't answer. The night had ended. She came home late from what she'd said was a work dinner. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't disheveled. She was calm in a way that made me uneasy. That particular kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from having already made a decision. I had dinner ready. She sat down across from me, looked at her plate for a moment, and then looked up. "I've been thinking," she said. That phrase. Anyone who's ever heard it in that tone knows exactly how much weight it carries. "Okay," I said. "I think I need to be honest with you." "All right." She folded her hands on the table. Measured. Practiced. "I need someone with real connections and influence, not just potential." The room went very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from nothing happening. The kind that comes from everything landing at once. I looked at her. She looked back, and her expression was almost gentle, which made it worse. There was no anger in her face. No guilt. Just the composed certainty of someone who had done their math and arrived at an answer. That's what you think I am, I said. Just potential. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I think we want different things. And I think you deserve to know why. Why? I repeated. The people I'm building a future around, the circles I'm moving into, they have weight. Social capital. Real leverage. And I can't keep waiting for, she paused. I care about you. But I need a partner who's already there. Not someone who might get there. I sat with that for a long moment. I thought about the venue, the invitations, my grandmother's flight. Then I thought about something else. About the 3 investor calls I'd taken in the past month. About the email I'd gotten from a fund in San Francisco that I hadn't told her about yet because I was waiting for the right moment. About Wesley's message 2 days ago saying that Orion, our third co-founder, brilliant, meticulous, obsessive in the best possible way, had finalized something that changed the shape of everything we were building. I thought about telling her all of that. Then I thought, she just told me who she is. You're right, I said. She blinked. We do want different things. She started to say something, then stopped. I'll call the venue tomorrow. You should take your things tonight if you want, or whenever you're ready. Whatever's easier. She stared at me. I don't think she expected agreement. That's it, she said. That's it. I got up, cleared my plate, rinsed it at the sink. I heard her push back her chair. I heard her pick up her bag. I heard her pause by the door. She didn't say anything else. The door closed. I stood at the sink for a while, looking at the faucet. Then I called Wesley and told him we needed to accelerate. The next 6 months are hard to describe without sounding like a highlight reel, which is not what they were. They were brutal in a specific, unglamorous way. The kind of brutal that comes with 16-hour days and cold coffee and arguments over spreadsheets and moments where you look at what you're building and can't tell if it's a masterpiece or a disaster. Wesley and I had been working on a platform that sat at the intersection of nonprofit infrastructure and private sector engagement. Essentially, a way for mid-sized companies to connect with high-impact charitable organizations in a manner that was transparent, trackable, and genuinely meaningful rather than performative. It sounds simple. It wasn't. The compliance architecture alone had taken Orion 9 months to think through. But the product was real. And somewhere in those 6 months, without any single dramatic turning point, it became undeniable. The fund in San Francisco committed. Then a firm in New York matched. Then a name came attached to an email that made Wesley and I sit in silence for approximately 45 seconds before either of us spoke. We weren't rich. Not yet. We weren't on magazine covers. But we were at the table. The real table. The one Serenella had been trying to sit at through other people's doors. Lucian, her colleague, the one with the West Village apartment, reached out to me directly about 8 months in. He'd heard about what we were building through a mutual contact in the philanthropy space. He didn't know Serenella and I had broken up. Or maybe he did. Either way, he didn't mention it. He asked if we'd consider presenting at something called the Hartwell Charity Gala, an annual event held at a midtown venue, black tie, significant donor attendance, the kind of room where foundations got funded and legacies got built. I asked Wesley. Wesley said, obviously yes. I want to be honest about something. By the time the gala came around, I wasn't thinking about Serenella. I know that might be hard to believe. People expect these stories to have a through line of obsession, some simmering need for vindication that fuels every decision. That's not what happened. What happened was that I got very busy and very focused, and the wound from that Tuesday night in the kitchen had gone from sharp to dull to something more like a scar than an injury. I was nervous the night of the gala, but not because of her. I was nervous because the room would hold roughly 400 people, because I was introducing the keynote speaker, a woman whose name I'd seen on the covers of policy journals for years, and because Orion had reworked 2 of our slides the night before, and I wanted to make sure I had the new numbers memorized. I wore a suit that Wesley had spent 40 minutes helping me choose. Dark navy, good cut. He said it was important to look like you belonged in a room before the room decides whether you belong. I arrived early, walked the space, found my mark on the stage, talked to the event coordinator, drank exactly 1 glass of water. Wesley was at our table near the front. Orion was already deep in conversation with someone from the Ford Foundation. I stood near the edge of the room for a while, watching people filter in. And then I saw her. She walked in through the main entrance with Zephyrin, her longtime friend, someone I'd met a handful of times, and a man I recognized after a moment as Thatcher, her boss. Thatcher was exactly the type of man you'd expect. Tailored tuxedo, silver hair, the kind of confident handshake posture you develop over decades of being the most important person in every room you enter. He had his hand at the small of her back. Serenella was in a deep burgundy dress, her hair up. She looked beautiful, I won't pretend otherwise. She scanned the room the way she always did, mapping it, reading it, finding the power centers. I watched her find Emmeline across the room and start moving toward her. She hadn't seen me yet. I went to check in with the event coordinator. The program started at 7:30. The executive director of the Hartwell Foundation introduced the evening's agenda. A brief video played. 2 board members spoke. Then my name was called. I walked up the steps to the stage. The lights were warm, the kind that make the crowd look like a sea of shadows with glinting jewelry. I settled at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the room. And somewhere in the 5th or 6th row, in that sea of faces, Serenella looked up. I know exactly when she saw me, because I was watching, not for her, just the room, and I saw the precise moment her expression changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't movie moment gasp and drop your champagne. It was quieter than that. It was the look of someone doing very fast math and arriving at a number they didn't expect. I held my notes, took a breath, and began. I talked for 8 minutes. I've given plenty of presentations. Some better, some worse. This one was good. I know because I could feel the room staying with me. That particular quality of attention that has a texture to it, a warmth, when it's real. I talked about what we were building. I talked about why the intersection of private capital and charitable infrastructure mattered. I talked about what we'd learned in the past year, what we were still learning, and what we believed was possible. Then I introduced the keynote speaker, and the room stood up. I shook her hand at the podium. I walked back down the steps. Wesley was waiting at the base of the stage and clapped me on the arm once, hard, without saying anything. Orion gave me a nod from across the table that conveyed, in the specific language of people who don't waste words, that it had gone well. I sat down, poured myself some water, let the adrenaline settle. I didn't look for Serenella. The cocktail hour after the keynote was long and crowded and loud in the best way. Wesley worked the room the way Wesley works every room, with this particular brand of warmth that makes people feel immediately trusted. Orion had found a corner with 2 foundation directors and was almost certainly delivering a 40-minute technical explanation with the calm intensity of someone defusing a bomb. I moved through conversation slowly, talked to 3 people who asked thoughtful questions, accepted a business card I would actually follow up on. And then, through a gap in the crowd, I saw Serenella moving toward me. She was alone. Thatcher was across the room, deep in a conversation that was clearly going well for him. Zephyrin was nowhere visible. She looked different up close. Not worse, just more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. Serenella was never uncertain. It was one of the things I genuinely admired about her. She stopped in front of me. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. Brief pause. The sound of the room pressing in from every direction. "I didn't know you'd be here," she said. "I'm presenting. Presenting company, I mean. We're one of the featured organizations tonight." "I know. I heard the introduction." She paused. "It was really good." "Thank you." She looked down at her glass for a moment, then back up. "You look well." "You too." Another pause. Longer this time. "I heard about what you've been building," she said. "Lucian mentioned it a few months ago. He said it was impressive. Lucian's been a good contact. We're glad he reached out." She absorbed that. The professional language. The distance it created. "I owe you an apology," she said. I looked at her. She held it. She wasn't flinching, I'll give her that. What I said that night, the way I framed it, it was cruel. Even if I was trying to be honest, it was cruel. And it wasn't accurate. I was making a judgment about where you were that had nothing to do with who you were. I said nothing for a moment. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "I mean it. I know you do." She searched my face for something. I'm not sure what. Permission, maybe. Or the old warmth. Or some signal that the door was still open. I didn't know how to give her what she was looking for, because I didn't have it to give. Not anymore. It wasn't anger that closed the door. Anger you can work through. It was something quieter. The clarity that comes when someone shows you exactly who they are in their least guarded moment. "I'm glad you're doing well," I said. And I meant it. Genuinely. She nodded. Her jaw tightened slightly in the way it did when she was holding something in. Take care of yourself, Serenella. I touched her arm once, briefly, the kind of touch that is a closing, not an opening, and moved toward where Wesley was waving me over. I didn't look back. Here is what I want to say about the aftermath, and I want to say it carefully because I've thought about it a lot. There's a version of this story where I walked away from that gala feeling vindicated, where I replayed her face in the 6th row 100 times and felt some deep satisfaction at the reversal, where the whole year was framed, in my mind, as a long march toward that one moment of visible proof. That's not what happened. What happened was I got in a cab with Wesley at 11:15, loosened my tie, and spent the ride home talking about a partnership opportunity that had come up at the event. We argued, politely, thoroughly, about whether we were ready for the operational complexity it would require. I said yes. Wesley said maybe. Orion had already texted 3 bullet points about it from wherever he disappeared to. I thought about Serenella once, briefly, somewhere around 42nd Street. I thought, I hope she finds what she's looking for. And then Wesley said something that needed a response, and I turned back to the conversation. But I keep coming back to one thing. Not the gala, not the stage, not her face in the crowd. I keep coming back to that Tuesday night in the kitchen. To the fact that she sat down across from me and said the most painful thing she could have said, not maliciously, but with a kind of calm, unsentimental precision, and in doing so, gave me the most clarifying moment of my adult life. Before that night, I was building something, but I was also spending energy managing the quiet distance between us, explaining myself, trying to make my ambitions legible to someone who had decided what legible looked like and found mine insufficient. After that night, I stopped explaining. I just worked. Wesley said once, around month 4, that I seemed different, less distracted. I told him I'd just gotten clear on some things. He didn't ask what things. Wesley's smart enough to know when not to ask. Orion told me something once, late one night in the office when we were the last 2 people there and the city was quiet outside the window. He said, the thing about being underestimated is that it only works against you if you agree with it. I didn't know then how much I'd needed to hear that. I'd spent years in a relationship with a woman who loved me. I believed that, genuinely, but who had also quietly decided there was a ceiling on what I was capable of. And somewhere along the way, without noticing it, I'd started building within that ceiling instead of past it. The night she walked out, the ceiling went with her. I want to be clear about one more thing, because I think it matters. Thatcher, her boss, the silver-haired man with the tuxedo and the confident handshake posture, was not a villain in this story. I don't know what he is to her. I didn't ask. It wasn't my place. What I know is this. She walked into that room on his arm looking like someone who had arrived exactly where she meant to go. And if that's true, if that's where she wanted to be, then I genuinely hope it gives her what she was looking for. The version of this story where I spend energy hating her doesn't serve me. It never did. What served me was the moment I sat at a sink, holding a cold coffee mug, and made a quiet decision to stop building towards someone else's idea of enough. In the weeks after the gala, things moved fast. 2 foundation partnerships confirmed. A conversation with a policy office in Washington that led to a pilot program we'd been circling for months. An expansion of the team. Valencia came on as our head of operations and immediately made every system we had 60% more functional. Navarra, who we'd been trying to recruit for nearly a year, finally said yes. Wesley gave a talk in Boston that got coverage from 3 publications. I did an interview for a magazine I'd been reading since college. None of it felt like victory. It felt like, and this is the honest answer, it felt like work. Good work. Work that mattered. But still just work. Still early mornings and hard conversations and problems that didn't have clean solutions. I don't tell you this to be falsely modest. I tell you because I think the most important part of this story isn't the gala. It's the kitchen. It's the moment something ended and something else became possible. Wesley got married in the fall, small ceremony, private, exactly his style. I gave a toast that he said was the only time he cried all day, which I consider one of the better compliments I've received. Orion remains the most intense person I've ever worked with, and I mean that as the highest possible praise. Valencia once caught $1 million operational error in the time it takes most people to pour a cup of coffee. The company is growing. Slowly in the ways that matter. Quickly in the ways you can measure. And me? I live differently now. Not in the way that sounds like a lifestyle rebrand. In the way that happens when you stop walking through your own life at an angle. When you stop performing confidence for an audience that has already decided and just start actually moving. I moved into a different apartment. Smaller, closer to the office, with better light in the mornings. I call my grandmother more than I used to. I still make bad coffee, and it still goes cold by the time I drink it. Some things don't change. Evermont, a friend from my earlier days in the city, someone who knew both Serenella and me, texted me about 3 weeks after the gala. He said he'd heard we'd both been there. He asked if we'd talked. I told him briefly. He said, "How was it?" I thought about it for a moment. "Fine," I said. "Genuinely fine." He said that was somehow the most satisfying answer I could have given. I think he was right. The last thing I want to say is this. I don't know what Serenella saw when she looked up from that 6th row seat and found me standing at a podium in a room full of people she'd spent years trying to reach. I don't know what calculation happened behind her eyes in that half second. What I know is what I felt. Nothing dramatic. No heat in the chest. No vindication crackling through my ribs. Just a kind of quiet clarity. The room was full. The work was real. The people I'd built it with were there. And I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because I'd outrun someone else's opinion of me. Because I'd stopped letting it set the pace. She said I only had potential. She was right. She just didn't understand that potential, in the right hands, is not a limitation. It's everything.